Run! Don't stop! My sister cried. Her voice echoed behind me as my feet slammed against the dirt. I tried to obey, but the darkness closed in too fast. My shoe caught a root, and I fell hard to the ground. Before I could scream, a cold hand emerged from the shadow and grabbed my wrist. It was like our father's hand. That night changed everything. But what I discovered 3 years later about that hand in the darkness, it would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the monsters we run from are the ones who taught us how to tie our shoes. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was 18 years old, living in the small town of Millbrook with my parents and my younger sister Emma. We were what everyone called the perfect family. Dad owned a successful construction company that his father had built from nothing. Mom worked as a nurse at the local hospital. Emma and I were both honor students. We lived in a beautiful colonial house at the end of Maple Street with a backyard that bordered the dense woods of Pine Ridge Forest. Those woods were our playground. Emma and I had spent countless hours building forts, playing hide and seek, and exploring every trail and clearing. We knew those woods like the back of our hands. Or at least we thought we did. Dad's brother Marcus lived about 10 minutes away in a smaller house closer to town. He'd never married, never had kids of his own, but he was always around. Uncle Marcus was the fun one, the one who brought us candy when he visited, who taught us card tricks, who always had a joke ready. He worked various jobs over the years, mostly in construction like Dad, but nothing ever seemed to stick. I remember the family tensions, though I didn't understand them then. Quiet arguments between Dad and Marcus that would stop the moment Emma or I walked into the room. The way Marcus would look around our house with something I couldn't quite identify in his eyes. The way he'd make comments about Dad's luck in business, always with a bitter edge that made everyone uncomfortable. But he was family, and family was everything to us. The night everything changed started like any other. It was a Friday in late September, and Emma and I had convinced our parents to let us have one last camping adventure in the backyard before the weather got too cold. We'd set up our tent near the edge of the woods, close enough to the house that Mom could see us from the kitchen window, but far enough to feel like we were truly camping. Dad had grilled burgers for us earlier, and we'd made s'mores over our little camp stove. Mom had brought us hot chocolate in thermos bottles and kissed us goodnight around 9 o'clock. Everything was perfect. Around 11, we heard Dad's voice calling from somewhere deep in the woods. Sarah! Emma! His voice sounded strange, strained. Not like the usual way he called for us. Emma sat up in her sleeping bag. Did you hear that? I nodded, unzipping the tent flap to listen better. Dad! I called back. His voice came again, but it was moving away from us, deeper into the forest. Girls, I need your help. Now, I know what you're thinking. 2 teenage girls should never have gone into dark woods alone at night. But this was our dad calling for help. This was the man who had taught us to be brave, to help family no matter what. And these were our woods. We could navigate them blindfolded. We grabbed our flashlights and started following his voice. Dad, where are you? Emma shouted as we pushed through the familiar trails. His voice kept leading us deeper, always just ahead, always just out of sight. But something felt wrong. The voice sounded like Dad, but there was something off about it. Something that made my skin crawl, even though I couldn't put my finger on what it was. We'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I realized we were in a part of the forest I'd never seen before. The trees were denser here, the undergrowth thicker. Our flashlight beams seemed swallowed by the darkness. Sarah! Emma whispered, grabbing my arm. I don't think that's Dad. That's when we heard the footsteps behind us. Heavy, deliberate steps that definitely weren't trying to be quiet. Someone was following us. Run! Emma breathed. We turned and started running back toward the house, but we were disoriented. The person behind us was getting closer, crashing through the underbrush. In the darkness, every tree looked the same. Every path seemed to lead nowhere. That's when Emma screamed those words that still echo in my nightmares. Run. Don't stop. I was trying. God, I was trying so hard to keep up with her, but my legs felt like lead. The footsteps behind us were getting closer and closer. I could hear breathing, heavy and labored. Then my shoe caught that root, and I went down hard. My flashlight went flying, the beam spinning wildly before landing pointed up at the canopy, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Before I could get up, before I could scream, that hand shot out of the darkness and grabbed my wrist with an iron grip. In that split second, in that terrible moment, I saw a face in the dim light. It wasn't my father. It was Uncle Marcus. His eyes were wild, desperate, and when he saw that I recognized him, something shifted in his expression. Something that made my blood run cold. "Uncle Marcus!" I gasped. He let go of my wrist immediately, stumbling backward like I'd burned him. "Sarah!" he said, and his voice was different now. Confused. "What are you doing out here?" But I was already scrambling to my feet, grabbing my flashlight, running toward Emma's voice. I could hear him behind me, calling my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran. Emma and I burst out of the woods and sprinted to the house, our hearts hammering in our chests. We pounded on the back door until Mom opened it, her face alarmed. "Girls, what's wrong? You're white as sheets." "Someone was chasing us in the woods," Emma panted. "Someone was pretending to be Dad." Mom immediately called Dad's cell phone. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. "Where did your father go?" she asked us, worry creeping into her voice. "We don't know," I said. "We thought he was calling us from the woods, but—" I trailed off, because how could I tell her what I'd seen? How could I tell her that Uncle Marcus had been in those woods, grabbing me in the dark? By morning, Dad was gone. His car was missing from the driveway. His wallet and keys were gone, but his cell phone was still plugged into the charger beside his bed. The police said he must have stepped out for something and been the victim of a carjacking or random crime. They launched a missing person investigation, but weeks turned into months with no leads, no evidence, no answers. Uncle Marcus was one of the first people to join the search parties. He organized volunteers, distributed flyers, comforted our family. He was the grieving brother, devastated by the loss. And I said nothing about what I'd seen in the woods. You have to understand the position I was in. I was 18 years old, traumatized and confused. Emma and I had given our statements to the police, telling them about the voice in the woods and someone chasing us, but we'd been vague about details. We were scared. It was dark. We weren't sure what we'd seen. And this was Uncle Marcus, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who'd never missed a birthday or Christmas, who was now helping hold our family together while we grieved. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I kept replaying that moment when he grabbed my wrist. The look in his eyes when he realized I'd recognized him. The way he called my name as I ran away. Had he been following us? Had he been the one calling for us in Dad's voice? And if so, where was Dad? These questions ate at me for months. I started having panic attacks. My grades plummeted. I barely spoke to anyone, including Emma. How could I tell her what I suspected? How could I accuse our uncle of what, exactly? By the time I graduated high school, I was a shadow of who I'd been before. I got into a college 3 states away and left Millbrook as soon as I could, desperate to escape the questions and the guilt and the terrible suspicion that I could have prevented whatever happened to Dad if I'd just been braver that night. Emma and I drifted apart. The shared trauma that should have brought us closer instead built a wall between us. We both knew something was wrong with our story about that night, but neither of us was ready to face what that might mean. Meanwhile, Uncle Marcus stepped seamlessly into the void Dad had left behind. He took over the construction company, temporarily, to help our family through the crisis. He started coming to family dinners every Sunday, sitting in Dad's chair at the head of a table. He helped Mom with finances and household repairs. To everyone else, he was the perfect brother-in-law, stepping up when his family needed him most. But I noticed things. The way he looked around our house like he was taking inventory. The way he'd made changes to the business, switching suppliers and vendors, moving money around. The way he seemed almost comfortable in Dad's role. By my sophomore year of college, I'd almost convinced myself that I'd imagined everything. Trauma does funny things to memory, right? Maybe in the chaos and fear of that night, I'd misidentified who I saw in the woods. Maybe Uncle Marcus had just been out looking for us after we went missing. Maybe he grabbed me to help me up, not to hurt me. Maybe my father really had just disappeared, victim of some random crime that had nothing to do with family or jealousy or the woods behind our house. I was almost ready to believe that. And then Detective Morrison called. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 years after Dad disappeared. I was 21, living in a cramped studio apartment near campus, working part-time at a coffee shop and struggling through my junior year of college. I hadn't been home in 8 months. I barely talked to Mom anymore, and Emma and I exchanged maybe a text every few weeks. Miss Chun, this is Detective Morrison with the Millbrook Police Department. We've reopened your father's case. We need to talk. My coffee went cold in my hands. What do you mean reopened? New evidence has come to light. Are you able to come to the station today? I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up and pretend that call never happened. But Emma's voice from that night still echoed in my dreams. Run. Don't stop. And I was tired of running. The drive back to Millbrook took 4 hours. 4 hours to prepare myself for whatever Detective Morrison was going to tell me. 4 hours to wonder if my worst suspicions were about to be confirmed. The police station looked exactly the same as it had 3 years ago when Emma and I had given our initial statements. Same fluorescent lights, same beige walls, same smell of disinfectant and old coffee. Detective Morrison was younger than the detectives who had worked Dad's case originally. He had kind eyes, but a serious expression that told me this wasn't going to be good news. He led me to a small interview room and placed a manila envelope on the table between us. Before we begin, he said, I want you to know that this is going to be difficult. We've uncovered some information that's going to be hard to hear. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I need to ask you about the night your father disappeared. In your original statement, you said you and Emma heard someone calling for you in the woods. You followed the voice, then someone chased you both home. You said you fell, and someone grabbed you, but you never got a clear look at who it was. That's right, I managed. You also said you couldn't identify the person who was chasing you. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading for 3 years. It was dark, I said. I was scared. Detective Morrison opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph. It was grainy, taken from what looked like a security camera, but clear enough. A man walking through woods at night, his face partially visible in the dim light. It wasn't my father. It was Uncle Marcus. My hand started shaking. The room felt like it was spinning. We found this footage from a hunting camera about a mile from your house, Detective Morrison explained. It was set up by a local hunting club to monitor deer activity. The timestamp shows it was taken the night your father disappeared, about 30 minutes before you girls came running home. He pulled out another photograph. This one showed my father's car, the blue Honda he'd been driving the night he vanished. But it wasn't abandoned on some remote highway like we'd been told. It was parked behind Marcus's auto shop, hidden behind a stack of old tires and scrap metal. Your uncle reported this car stolen 2 days after your father disappeared, Detective Morrison continued. But according to the timestamp on this security footage from his neighbor's property, he was the one who parked it there. The pieces were falling into place, and each one felt like a knife in my chest. There's more, Morrison said. We've been analyzing your uncle's financial records from the past few years. Did you know that your father's business has been extremely profitable since his disappearance? I shook my head. The company's revenue has increased by 40%. Your uncle has been taking contracts that your father had turned down, working with suppliers your father had refused to use. He's made some very lucrative deals. What are you saying? I'm saying your uncle had both motive and opportunity to make your father disappear. And now we have evidence placing him in the woods the night it happened. Detective Morrison leaned forward. Sarah, I think you saw more than you told us in your original statement. I think you recognized who grabbed you that night. And I think that's been eating at you for 3 years. The dam burst. 3 years of guilt and fear and terrible suspicion came pouring out. It was him, I whispered. It was Uncle Marcus. I saw his face when he grabbed me. But I was so scared, and he was family, and I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe in the dark I'd made a mistake. You weren't wrong, Detective Morrison said gently. And you're not alone. We found other evidence, too. Over the next 2 hours, Detective Morrison laid out the case they'd been building against Uncle Marcus. It was more extensive than I'd ever imagined. Financial records showing that Marcus had been embezzling from Dad's construction company for months before the disappearance. Phone records placing him in the area of our house on the night in question, despite his alibi that he'd been home all evening. Witness statements from neighbors who'd seen him driving Dad's car on roads that wouldn't have been on the route to wherever he claimed to be going. Most damning of all were the soil samples. During the original investigation, police had taken samples from under Marcus's fingernails during routine questioning. At the time, the samples had been filed away and forgotten. But new DNA technology had allowed them to analyze those samples more thoroughly. The soil matched dirt from a specific area of Pine Ridge Forest, about 2 miles from our house. An area where no one had any reason to be, especially not in the middle of the night. "We think that's where your father is buried," Detective Morrison said quietly. "And we think your uncle was disposing of the body when you and Emma inadvertently interrupted him." The voice calling us into the woods hadn't been Dad. It had been Marcus, using some kind of voice modulation or just calling from far enough away that we couldn't tell the difference. He'd needed us away from the house, away from potential witnesses, while he finished his work. But we'd followed the voice too quickly, gotten too close. So he'd had to chase us away, hoping 2 scared teenagers wouldn't be able to identify him in the dark. He'd been almost right. I called Emma from the parking lot of the police station, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. We hadn't spoken in 6 months, but I needed to tell her what I'd learned. She deserved to know the truth. She answered on the 4th ring. "Sarah!" Her voice was cautious, surprised. I need to tell you something about that night in the woods." There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "I know," she said. "I've always known." "What do you mean?" "The hand that grabbed you. You screamed when you saw it, remember? You said, 'Uncle Marcus?' I heard you, even though you were behind me. I heard you say his name. My blood turned to ice. Why didn't you ever?" "Because I was 16 and terrified, and he was family, and Dad was already gone, and I thought maybe I heard wrong. Maybe in the dark and the chaos I misheard what you said." Her voice broke. "I convinced myself I imagined it. But I didn't, did I?" "No," I said. "You didn't." We both started crying then. 3 years of guilt and fear and isolation finally breaking open between us. "I should have said something," Emma sobbed. "I should have been brave enough to tell the truth. We were just kids," I told her. "We were scared kids who just lost their father. It's not our fault." But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. How many nights had I lain awake wondering if Dad would still be alive if I'd been brave enough to tell the truth from the beginning? The investigation moved quickly after that. With my testimony corroborating the physical evidence, police felt confident enough to search the area of Pine Ridge Forest where the soil samples had originated. They found Dad's body 3 days later, buried in a shallow grave about 50 yards off an old logging road. He'd been shot once in the back of the head, execution style. The medical examiner estimated he'd been dead for 3 years, killed the same night he disappeared. Marcus was arrested at his office the next morning. I wasn't there, but Emma was. She'd driven down from Portland as soon as I called her, and we'd both been staying with Mom, trying to support each other through the nightmare of reliving everything. Emma said Marcus looked genuinely shocked when the handcuffs went on, like he couldn't believe his perfect plan had finally fallen apart. The local news covered his arrest, and suddenly our family tragedy was everyone's business again. Reporters called our house. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to us in years suddenly wanted to share their theories about what had really happened. Everyone had an opinion about why we hadn't told the truth from the beginning. But I didn't care about any of that. For the first time in 3 years, I knew where my father was. I knew what had happened to him. The questions that had been eating me alive finally had answers. Marcus's trial began 6 months later. Emma and I both testified, our voices steady as we recounted that night in the woods for a courtroom full of strangers. It was terrifying, but also liberating. Finally telling the complete truth after years of silence and half-lies. The prosecution painted a clear picture of Marcus's motive. He'd always been jealous of Dad's success, resentful that Dad had inherited the family business while Marcus struggled with various jobs. 4 months before the murder, he'd been embezzling money from the construction company, falsifying invoices and skimming profits. Dad had discovered the theft and confronted Marcus about it. According to phone records, they'd had a heated conversation the day before Dad disappeared. The prosecution argued that Marcus had killed Dad to prevent exposure of his crimes, and to take over the business permanently. The defense tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that traumatized teenagers couldn't be trusted to accurately remember events from 3 years ago. They painted Marcus as a loving brother and uncle who'd been devastated by Dad's disappearance and had stepped up to help his family in their time of need. But the evidence was overwhelming. The hunting camera footage, the car hidden behind a shop, the soil samples under his fingernails, the financial records showing months of embezzlement, and finally our testimony about recognizing him in the woods that night. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, fraud, embezzlement. Marcus was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before sentencing, the judge allowed victim impact statements from our family. Mom went first, her voice shaking as she talked about the man she'd loved for 25 years, the father who'd been stolen from his daughters. Emma spoke about growing up without Dad, about missing his guidance during the most important years of her life. Then it was my turn. I looked directly at Marcus as I spoke, this man who'd bounced me on his knee when I was little, who'd taught me card tricks and brought me candy and murdered my father for money. You didn't just kill my dad, I told him. You killed our family. You sat at our dinner table for 3 years, pretending to grieve with us while you knew exactly where he was buried. You watched Mom cry herself to sleep every night wondering if he was alive somewhere, if he was hurt, if he was trying to get home to us. Marcus stared at his hands the entire time I spoke. He never looked up, never showed any remorse or acknowledgement of what he'd done to our lives. But you made one mistake, I continued. You underestimated us. You thought 2 scared teenagers would be too traumatized to remember what really happened that night. You thought we'd stay silent forever. You were wrong. It's been a year since the trial ended. Emma and I talk every week now, slowly rebuilding the relationship that Marcus's actions had fractured. We're planning to start a foundation in Dad's name to help families navigate the legal system when a loved one goes missing. We sold Dad's construction company and used the money to establish the fund. It felt right, turning something that had been corrupted by greed and betrayal into something that could help other people find answers. I still have nightmares sometimes about that night in the woods, but they're different now. Instead of being chased by faceless monsters, I'm chasing answers. And sometimes, in my dreams, I catch them. The hardest part isn't the nightmares, though. It's the guilt that I'll probably carry forever about staying silent for 3 years. About all the nights Mom cried herself to sleep wondering if Dad was alive somewhere. About the justice that was delayed because I was too scared to tell the truth. But I've learned something important. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually, even when it's buried 50 yards off a logging road in the middle of Pine Ridge Forest. Even when it's hidden behind familiar faces and family dinners and Christmas presents wrapped with love. Marcus thought he was smart. He thought he'd planned the perfect crime. Kill his brother, take over his business, and rely on family loyalty to keep his nieces quiet about what they'd seen in the woods that night. He almost succeeded. For 3 years, he lived Dad's life, ran Dad's business, sat in Dad's chair, all while Dad's body rotted in a shallow grave in the forest where Emma and I used to play. But here's what Marcus didn't understand about the truth. It's patient. It can wait. It can sit buried in police evidence files and hunting camera footage and soil samples for as long as it takes. But eventually, someone brave enough to dig will come along. Detective Morrison was that person for us. And Emma and I finally found the courage to stop running from what we'd seen that night. Run! Don't stop! My sister had cried. And I did run. I ran from the truth for 3 years. But I'm not running anymore. Sometimes the monsters who chase you in the woods are the same ones who taught you how to ride a bike. Sometimes the hands that grab you in the darkness belong to people who used to tuck you in at night. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who know exactly where you live and exactly how much you trust them. But I've also learned that truth is stronger than fear, and justice is more patient than we think. And sometimes the scariest thing you can do is stop running and turn around to face whatever's chasing you. Because when you do, you might just discover that you're braver than you ever imagined. If this story moved you, please give it a like and subscribe for more true crime content. Let me know in the comments what you think about family betrayal cases like this one.